They packed my son's car the night before like I wasn't standing right there watching. Bags stacked in the driveway, sandals tied to the outside of a backpack, the cooler loaded with snacks I had helped buy. My daughter-in-law counted items on her phone, reading off a list. My son carried things without looking up, and my granddaughter Sophie, 16 and earbuds already in, bounced on her heels by the front door like the trip had already started. Nobody asked if I wanted to come. Nobody had to. I already knew. 2 weeks earlier, my son had sat across from me at my kitchen table, coffee going cold between his hands, and said it plainly. "Mom, the cabin only sleeps 6 comfortably, and with the kids it's already tight. You'd be uncomfortable. You know how your knee gets on long drives. It'll be better if you just hold down the fort here, water the tomatoes, keep an eye on the mail." He said it the way you say something you've already decided. Not a conversation, a notification. I nodded. I said, "Of course, go have fun." And I meant it, or I told myself I did. But that night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about how I had paid for half of that cabin rental. My son had asked me 2 months ago if I wanted to go in on a family trip. I said yes. I wrote the check. And somewhere between then and the night before departure, I had been quietly edited out of the plan. My knee is fine, by the way. The morning they left, I made breakfast for all of them. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. I packed sandwiches for the road. I hugged the grandchildren, smiled at my daughter-in-law, and stood on the porch waving until the car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was very quiet. I'm 68 years old. I raised 2 children, mostly alone, after my husband Ray passed from a heart attack when I was 44. I worked as a dental hygienist for 31 years. I kept the house, kept the yard, showed up to every school event and every holiday and every family thing that ever needed doing. I was the person who remembered birthdays and made the potato salad and drove to the airport at 5 in the morning without being asked. I was useful. I was reliable. I was apparently someone you left home to watch the mail. I sat there for about an hour. Then I got up, opened the junk drawer, and found my passport. Still valid, 2 years left. I had about $14,000 in my savings account, the kind of money you keep for emergencies and then forget what counts as an emergency. Ray had always wanted us to go to Ireland. We'd talked about it every year for the length of our marriage, and then he was gone and the trip stayed unscheduled in some future that never came. I thought about that trip for 20 years. I thought about it while I was being useful. I opened my laptop and looked at flights. Boston to Dublin, 1 seat. Leaving Thursday. My hands were steady when I typed in my card number, steadier than I expected. I called my neighbor Patty and asked if she'd take the mail and check the tomatoes. She said, "Sure, honey. You going somewhere?" I said, "Just a short trip." She asked where. I said, "Ireland." She went quiet for a second and then said, "Well, good for you." I packed light, 1 carry-on, a tote bag. Comfortable walking shoes, my good raincoat, 3 sweaters because it's Ireland and I know better. I packed the small framed photo of Ray I keep on my nightstand. I didn't know why. I just knew I wanted him close. The night before I left, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine and thought about what I was doing. My son would call from the cabin in a day or 2, and I wouldn't be here. He'd call my cell and I'd answer from 4,000 miles away, and I didn't know what I'd say. I hadn't figured that part out yet. I finished the wine. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The drive to Logan Airport was quiet and dark, still before sunrise. The cab driver didn't try to talk much, which I appreciated. I watched the highway lights blur past and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, something that took me a few miles to name: anticipation. The airport was its usual chaos, but I moved through it without rushing. I had extra time. I'd given myself extra time on purpose because I'm 68 and I've learned that giving yourself room is not weakness, it's wisdom. I found my gate, bought a coffee, sat by the window, and watched the planes. I hadn't flown international since Ray and I took the kids to Florida when they were small, which technically wasn't international, but that's how rarely I flew anywhere that required a passport. The woman at the gate counter checked my boarding pass and smiled, one of those professional smiles. I smiled back and walked down the jetway like I did this every week. I had a window seat. The man next to me was asleep before we even pushed back from the gate. I didn't mind. I watched Boston shrink below me, the harbor going silver in the early light, and then the clouds swallowed everything, and there was nothing to see but white. I opened the in-flight magazine and read an article about a chef in Portugal. I ate the little pretzels they brought. I dozed somewhere over the Atlantic. When I woke up, there was pale gold light coming through the window, and the pilot was announcing our descent into Dublin. And something in my chest cracked open quietly, the way old wood splits along a grain you didn't know was there. I was really here. Dublin was gray and soft-edged the way a city looks when it's still deciding whether to let you in. I took a taxi to the guest house I'd booked, a narrow 4-story building on a side street off the Liffey. The woman at the desk had red hair and called me Love, which made me feel more welcome than I'd felt in a long time. My room was small but clean, with a window that looked out onto rooftops and a sliver of sky. I put Ray's photo on the nightstand. I unpacked slowly, hanging things in the wardrobe, arranging my toiletries on the bathroom shelf the way you do when you're claiming a space as yours for a little while. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle around me. I didn't cry. I just sat. Sometimes grief and relief look exactly the same from the inside. That evening I walked out without a map and just followed the streets, found a pub around the corner with low lighting and dark wood, and a man playing fiddle in the corner, not performing exactly, more like accompanying the room. I ordered a Guinness because I was in Dublin, and it felt like the appropriate thing to do, and ate a bowl of beef stew that was so good I slowed down halfway through just to make it last. Nobody looked at me with that particular careful look people give you when you're old and eating alone. Nobody offered to help me with my coat. I was just a woman in a pub on a Tuesday evening, which was exactly what I wanted to be. I walked back to the guest house slowly. The air smelled like rain and stone and something floral I couldn't identify. I stood outside for a moment and looked up at the sky. Ray would have loved this. I went upstairs and slept 9 hours without waking once. She was at the breakfast table the next morning. Not that I noticed her right away. I was focused on the coffee, which was excellent, and the brown bread, which was even better. But she spoke first. "You look like someone who didn't sleep enough last night," she said, which was funny because I'd slept wonderfully. I told her that. She raised an eyebrow. "Then you just look like that naturally." I laughed before I could stop myself. Her name was Frances, 71 years old, recently retired from 40 years as a hospital administrator in Pittsburgh. Her husband was alive and well and perfectly happy at home, she said, and she told him she was going to Ireland for 2 weeks, and he'd said, "Bring me back some whiskey." She loved him precisely for that. She was compact and direct, and had the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. She carried a walking stick, not because she needed it, she was quick to clarify, but because cobblestones are treacherous and she'd worked in hospitals long enough to know exactly what a hip fracture does to a person's next 5 years. We walked together after breakfast, nothing planned, just out. She'd been to Dublin before and knew some things worth knowing, a bookshop that required an actual map to navigate, a garden tucked behind a church that had no signage and somehow stayed mostly empty even in tourist season. A fish and chip shop near the canal that she declared the correct answer to any question you might have about lunch. She was right about all of it. At lunch she asked about my family the way people do when they're actually listening for the answer. I told her the short version. She ate a chip and looked out at the canal and said, "So they went on the trip you helped pay for and left you behind because of your knee." She said it plainly, no decoration, and somehow that made it easier to hear. "My knee is fine," I said again. "I know," she said. "That's the point." That night, back in my room, I turned my phone on for the first time since the flight. 14 messages, 11 from my son, 2 from my daughter-in-law, 1 from my granddaughter Emma, who is 19 and in her second year at UMass. I read the timestamps. The first message came about 6 hours after they'd left, probably when they arrived at the cabin and tried to call the house. Then the cell calls started. By yesterday evening there were voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The next morning, Frances had a rental car and a plan. "Wicklow," she said over breakfast. "The mountains. There's a monastic site I've wanted to see since I was 23 and read about it in a library book and never got around to actually going." We drove south through green that didn't look real, the kind of green that makes you think someone has turned a saturation slider too far, and then you realize, no, this is just what grass looks like when it rains 300 days a year. The mountains rose up gentle and ancient, covered in heather gone to rust and purple at the edges. Glendalough was quiet that Tuesday. 2 lakes in a valley, the ruins of a monastery older than almost anything I could name, a round tower standing against the sky like it had been there since the beginning of things and fully intended to remain. We walked the path around the upper lake without talking much. The water was dark and still. Ravens called from somewhere above. I thought about Ray again. Not with the usual ache, but something softer. He would have wanted to climb higher than was advisable. He would have read every single information plaque. He would have bought the guidebook and carried it home still unread, the way he always did. I found a flat stone near the water and sat down. Frances sat on a nearby rock and opened her water bottle. She didn't ask what I was thinking about. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I said finally. I just needed to go somewhere. She drank her water. "I know that," she said. "You don't have to explain yourself to me." But I kept going anyway because something about the valley and the water and the old stones made the words come up without permission. I spent 20 years being the person who stays. After Ray died, I told myself it was for the kids, and then it was for the grandchildren, and then it just became who I was. The person who stays and holds things together. I didn't even notice when staying stopped being a choice and became a habit. Frances turned the water bottle in her hands. "My mother did the same thing," she said. "She called it being dependable. I think she was just lonely and didn't know how to say it." We sat there a while longer. A heron landed on a stone at the water's edge, studied the surface with absolute patience, and then stood very still. On the drive back, Frances played Van Morrison on the car stereo, and we sang along badly to Brown-Eyed Girl, and I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I turned my phone on again. More messages. My daughter-in-law this time, longer, her voice pulled tight in a way that meant she was working to stay calm. "Helen, we're worried. We've called the house multiple times. Where are you? Please just let us know you're okay." My son's last message was just, "Mom, please." I opened my text thread and typed, "I'm safe. Don't worry." I didn't say where I was. I put the phone away. I ordered room service, which felt absurdly luxurious, and ate in bed watching a documentary about Irish bod preservation with Ray's photo propped against the lamp and the sound of rain on the window, and I thought, this is good. This is actually good. Frances knocked on my door at 9 the next morning. "Connemara," she said. 2 days. I booked us a place. I grabbed my bag. We drove west through a landscape that felt like the edge of the world. The road narrowing between stone walls, the Atlantic appearing and disappearing, the sky doing things I didn't have words for. We stopped in Galway for lunch and walked the town, looked in shop windows, bought nothing. An old man played ukulele on pipes outside a pub, and the sound went straight through me like cold water. Frances bought us 2 small glasses of whiskey from a bar the size of a closet, and we stood on the street in the wind and drank them. She asked about Ray. I told her. Not the sad version I keep rehearsed for when people ask, the real version. How we met when I was 22 and he was working construction and had no business being so charming. How he was the kind of man who cried at movies and pretended he had something in his eye. How he used to leave notes around the house for me to find, on the bathroom mirror, inside my shoe, tucked into the bread bag. How I still sometimes reach for my phone to call him and have to remind myself all over again. Frances listened without interrupting. "You haven't talked about him in a while," she said, the real way. "No," I said, "I haven't." She handed me the rest of her whiskey. Connemara was gray and wild and full of a silence that wasn't empty, more like a held breath. The cottage Frances had found sat back from the road, looking out at a stretch of bog, and beyond that the long, flat line of the Atlantic. We had a little kitchen and a peat fire, and a view that made you understand why people write songs about a place. I cooked dinner the first night. Simple things, what I could find at the small shop in the nearest village: soup, soda bread, roasted vegetables. Francis set the table and opened wine, and we ate while the fire snapped and the wind pushed at the windows. It reminded me of something I'd lost track of, that I am actually good at this. Not the cooking itself, but the ease of it, the comfort I can create with small things. I had started to think of that skill as just another service I provided. Sitting there, it felt like something else, something that belonged to me. I turned my phone on after dinner out of habit more than intention. The text from Emma stopped me. "Grandma, Mom told me you're not home. Are you okay? Where are you? I won't tell them if you don't want me to. I just need to know you're safe." I looked at that message for a long time. Emma had been 12 when Ray died. She used to come stay with me summers through high school, just the two of us, and we'd drive up to the Cape and eat fried clams and walk the beach and talk about things she couldn't say to her parents. She was the one who noticed things. She always had been. I typed back, "I'm in Ireland. I'm perfectly fine. More than fine, actually. Please don't worry, sweetheart." She answered in under a minute. I reel and... "Grandma, I am dead." "How did you get there? When did this happen? Are you alone?" I laughed out loud. Frances looked up from her book. "My granddaughter," I said. Emma's next message came in 3 parts. "Okay, so first of all, you are literally my hero. Second of all, Dad is kind of losing it. Third, I think he knows why you went. He hasn't said it, but I can tell. I read it twice." Then I typed, "Don't take sides. Just let me know you're okay." She sent back a heart and then, "You look brave. I can tell just from knowing you went." I set the phone down. Something in my throat was tight in a way that wasn't quite sadness. Frances was watching me. "My granddaughter," I said again. "She gets it." Frances nodded slowly. "They usually do," she said. "The young ones. It's the middle generation that has the hardest time. We stayed 2 nights in Connemara. We walked the bog on the second morning, moving carefully along the path, the ground spongy and ancient under our feet. I picked up a piece of stone worn smooth by something older than I could conceive and turned it over in my palm. I thought about Ray's notes, how many I'd thrown away without keeping, how I hadn't thought to save them because I'd assumed we had unlimited time. That's the thing about being the person who stays. You start to think the things that anchor you will always be there because you're always there. And then one day you reach for the anchor and it's gone, and you realize you stopped moving so long ago you forgot you were supposed to want somewhere to go. I put the stone in my coat pocket. That evening, sitting by the fire while the rain came sideways at the windows, I opened the small notebook I'd bought in the gift shop at Glendalough. I'd been carrying it for days without writing anything in it. I uncapped my pen and wrote at the top of the first page, things I should have said out loud. I stared at it for a while. Then I started. "When you said I'd be more comfortable at home, you meant you'd be more comfortable with me there. I know the difference. I was in that trip from the beginning, emotionally and financially. You can't remove a person from a plan and leave their contribution in it. I am not a service. I am not a convenience. I am not background. I am your mother, and I have not stopped being a whole person just because you stopped looking." I wrote for 20 minutes. My hand didn't shake once. The next morning we drove back to Dublin the long way, stopping when something caught our eye, which was often: a ruined castle on a hill, a beach so empty it felt personal, a pub in a village so small it had no name on the map, where a woman older than both of us danced alone by the window to whatever was playing on the radio, not for anyone, just because the music required it of her. We stood in the doorway and watched. "You think she's always done that?" Frances asked. "I think she started doing it recently," I said. And I didn't know why I thought that, but I did. Back in Dublin that last evening, we walked along the canal and sat on a bench in the fading light. Frances had a flight the next afternoon. I had 1 day left. "It's strange," I said. "I didn't come here to feel better. I came here because I needed to go somewhere, and this is where he always wanted us to go. But I feel better anyway." "Maybe that's what going somewhere does," Francis said. "It doesn't fix the thing that sent you. It just reminds you that you're still the kind of person who can go." I thought about that for a long time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A voicemail from my son. I almost didn't play it, but something in me said, "Listen." His voice was different from the earlier messages, less clipped, more careful, like a man choosing every word before he put it down. "Mom, I don't know if you'll hear this before you get home or after. I've been trying to think about what to say for days, and everything I come up with sounds like an excuse. The truth is, we took you out of the trip and told ourselves it was for you, that it was easier, that you'd prefer it. But I know that's not why. I think I've been treating you like something fragile for years because it's easier than admitting you're not. You're not fragile. You never were. I'm sorry. I don't need you to respond right now. I just needed to say it." I sat with the phone in my lap for a moment. Francis was looking at the canal. "My son," I said. She nodded. "He said he was sorry." She nodded. "He said he was sorry." She was quiet a moment. "What kind of sorry?" "The real kind," I said. "The kind where he actually said what he did." She was quiet a little longer. "That's rarer than it should be." I didn't call him back, not yet. I put the phone in my pocket and watched the water and thought about what it means to be known by your children. Really known, not as a role, but as a person, and how most of us give up on that somewhere in middle age and settle for being loved in the shorthand version. I wasn't ready to give up on the full version anymore. Frances left the next morning. We hugged outside the guest house, her walking stick hooked over her arm, her bag perfectly packed. She handed me a folded piece of paper. "Email," she said. "Don't lose it." I told her I wouldn't. I meant it. She walked toward her taxi and didn't look back, which I understood. Some goodbyes work better without the looking back part. I spent my last day alone. I took the Dart along the coast to Bray and walked the promenade with the sea on one side and the headland rising up ahead. I bought fish and chips from a shop near the beach and sat on a bench and ate them with my face turned into the wind. A dog came and sat nearby with philosophical patience, and I gave him one chip, which he accepted without drama. I thought about what I was going home to, not the house, not the routine, not the role. What I was going home to was a conversation I had been avoiding for years by being too useful to have it, by staying, by watering the tomatoes and watching the mail and making the potato salad and not asking for a seat at the table because I'd learned somewhere along the way that asking made everyone uncomfortable and I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. I was tired of making that trade. The headland trail took about an hour. It was steep in places, and my knee genuinely did ache a little at the top. But I stood up there looking out at the Irish Sea and the coast curving away in both directions, and it was worth every step. I took a photograph. Not for anyone. Just for me. On the train back to Dublin, I sent Emma a message, heading home tomorrow. "Can I come see you before I go back to the house?" She replied before the train reached the next stop. "Yes, obviously. I'll make food. Fair warning, it'll be eggs because that's where I am, culinarily." I typed back, "Eggs are fine. I'll teach you the rest." She sent back, "Deal. I missed you. Don't let them make you small again." That last sentence sat in my chest the rest of the way home. Don't let them make you small again. I looked out the train window at the city easing by, at the backs of houses and small gardens and lives being lived without my awareness of them, and I thought about all the years I had let myself be edited. Not by cruelty, most of it wasn't cruelty, by assumption, by the slow, quiet consensus of a family that had decided, without meaning any harm by it, that I had become background. I had let them. That was the part I had to sit with. I hadn't gone to Ireland to punish my son. I hadn't canceled anything or arranged any reversal of fortune. I had just gone, just taken the money I'd saved for an emergency and decided finally that this qualified, that I qualified. Ray's photo was still on the nightstand when I packed it away in the morning. I wrapped it in my softest sweater. I looked around the small room, said something quiet that wasn't quite goodbye, and carried my bag down to the lobby. The flight home was uneventful. I watched half a movie, ate the little pasta they served, and slept for an hour somewhere over Newfoundland. When we landed at Logan, the air felt thick and familiar, the kind of air that knows your name. I took a cab to Emma's apartment in Somerville. She answered the door in a sweatshirt that said her university's name across the front, her hair up, holding a spatula. "Hi," she said, and then she threw her arms around me and held on for a minute, and I held on back. The eggs were good. She'd figured out how to do them low and slow the way I'd tried to teach her at Christmas and clearly practiced since. We sat at her small kitchen table and ate, and she asked about everything: the guest house, Francis, the monastic ruins, the woman dancing alone in the pub, the fish and chips on the bench in Bray. She listened the way she always had, really listened, like every detail was information she wanted to keep. "Did you feel like Dad when you were there?" she asked. "A little," I said, in the good way, like he was with me. She nodded. "I think he'd be glad you went." "I think he'd be glad you went." "I think so too," I said. She was quiet a moment, turning her fork over. "Dad's been weird since he left. Quiet. He cleaned the kitchen at the cabin 3 times, which is not something he does. I think he knew before he called you what the problem was. He just hadn't let himself know it yet." I didn't say anything. "He's scared you're different now," she said. "I told him you're not different. You're just more." "More," I repeated. "Like you were always there, but now there's more of you taking up space." She shrugged. "I don't know if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. When I got home, the house was exactly as I'd left it. Patty had watered the tomatoes, which were going beautifully, and left a note on the counter that said, "Looked good, helped myself to 2. Hope that's okay, so glad you went somewhere." My key turned easily in the lock. The air inside was still and familiar and waiting. I put my bag down in the hall. I picked up Ray's photo and set it back on the mantel. Then I stood in the middle of the living room and just looked around at the place I'd kept for 30 years. The furniture I'd chosen, the curtains I'd sewn myself, the bookshelves he built and I'd filled. It was still mine. That was still true. My son called that evening. I answered. There was a pause on his end, like he hadn't been sure I would. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." Another pause. "Are you home?" "Just got in." He cleared his throat. "I've been wanting to call for days. I left a voicemail. I didn't know if you heard it." "I heard it." "Okay." He breathed out slowly. "I meant it. All of it." "I know," I said. "I could hear that you did." "I don't know how I missed it," he said. "I could hear that you did. I don't know how I missed it," he said. "How long you been feeling like that?" I kept thinking, she's fine, she's always fine, and I let that be enough. "Being fine is not the same as being seen," I said. "No," he said. "It's not." We were quiet for a moment, not uncomfortably. The kind of quiet that comes after something true has been said and needs a little room. "I'd like to have dinner," he said finally. "Not a big thing. Just you and me, if you want. Laura too, if that's okay. I just want to sit down and actually talk, like we used to." I thought about Francis at the breakfast table. "You're here?" So they were wrong. "I'd like that," I said, "but not yet. Give me a week to just be home." "Of course," he said quickly. "Take whatever time you need." After we hung up, I sat in the armchair by the window with a cup of tea and watched the evening come down over the yard. The tomatoes were doing well. The hydrangeas needed deadheading. The bird feeder was empty and would need filling in the morning. Small things. My things. I opened the notebook and wrote on a new page. Things I know now. People don't really see how invisible you've become until you make yourself visible somewhere else. You can love your family completely and still need space from what they've made of you. Grief doesn't stop you from living. Only waiting for permission does. Some trips aren't about the destination. They're about proving to yourself you still have a direction. I paused, then added one more line. "Ray, I went. I finally went. You would have bought all the guidebooks and read none of them, and I would have loved every second of it." I closed the notebook. The bird feeder could wait until morning. The hydrangeas could wait. The dinner with my son could wait a week, because I'd asked for that, and he'd agreed, and I'd asked without apologizing for asking, which was new, and which felt like something worth practicing. I sat in my chair in my house in the quiet I had earned, with the Atlantic still somewhere in my body, and Frances's email address folded in my pocket, and my granddaughter's words, doing what good words do when they find the right place to land. Don't let them make you small again. I wasn't going to. I was 68 years old. I had crossed an ocean alone. I had walked ancient ground and eaten good bread and drunk whiskey in the street, and sat by a fire I didn't have to share and written things I'd been swallowing for years. I had not stopped being a mother. I had not stopped being a grandmother. I had simply started, finally, being myself first. The tea went cold. I didn't mind. I sat there in the dark until the streetlights came on outside, and I let myself feel, without apology, how full the quiet was.